Good afternoon, all. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Don Stephanie. I'll be joined here by Tim James from Tetra VX. We're here to present to you a little bit about the transition from Microsoft Skype for Business over to the Teams. And over here at VoIP Supply, we're really proud to now be partnered with Tetra VX to bring solutions to you that are a full solution, including Microsoft Skype for Business and the now Teams. We were founded in 2002. We're a small shop, 30 plus, and we have served over 125,000 customers worldwide since our inception. Up here in Amherst, New York, the sunny Buffalo area, we are the Miami of the North. I'll tell you a little bit about what kind of engaged Tetra and VoIP Supply together. We actually have a partner program here at VoIP Supply. It's probably how you found us in the first place. As you know, from the 50,000-foot view, we focused on the open source SIP for the most part during our beginnings, and we bring you all those devices still. And of course, now with Skype for Business, there's a ton of questions coming our way and a lot of folks interested in that solution, and our partnership with Tetra VX comes from that. So we're really happy to do that, and as part of the partner program here at VoIP Supply, you can, of course, reach out to me anytime, and I can help you engage on that. And through that program, you'll be able to deliver this solution to your clients through our partner, Tetra VX. And, of course, all the things that go with it, we'll help you with that here at VoIP Supply. So the Cloud Span Marketplace, Tetra VX is now part of that. That's where we're bringing to our reseller community the ability to bring additional recurring revenue, leverage our resources of marketing and our quoting tools, and we'll bring you that recurring commission and just a single place to go for all your solutions. So we're going to help you grow your business. Thank you very much again for joining us today.
Thank you. As he mentioned, my name is Tim James. I am the Director of Global Services at Tetra VX. So Tetra VX, as he mentioned, is a cloud provider. I also provide pro services as well for helping everything specifically around the unified communication and collaboration experience. So with that, we're going to kind of jump into the topic at hand, which is the Teams and kind of how we can help transition people to get from either Skype for Business on-prem or online to Microsoft Teams, or if they've never done Teams or Skype for Business, how we can kind of help them through that, or how you can help kind of guide your customers through that. So I kind of want to level set because there's a lot of confusion about what Teams really is and is not, and so I wanted to kind of level set on where we're at today with Teams. So at its core, Microsoft Teams is a cloud-based team workspace. So, it is cloud-based, but it's also chat-based, right? So it's taking kind of persistent chat, it's taking some of the functionality and so forth that are also in Skype for Business and adding that into Microsoft Teams, but it's also creating a workspace for things like SharePoint libraries and meeting spaces and all of that, and kind of putting a nice wrapper around it in one application. Having rich team meetings and conferencing functionality. So the Skype meetings that you're having today will transition over to Microsoft Teams at some point in time, especially if you're in a Skype for Business Online type of customer going over to Microsoft Teams. And that's also with it brings it with it some new enhancements that Microsoft is working on around the meetings. And some of the things that you may have seen at announced at some of the conferences that Satya from Microsoft kind of released, and showing where you can walking in and recognizing the people and doing the transcription, so voice to text, so that if I miss that meeting and I can go back into my team space and I can easily look through the transcription and find or search just on the components that impact me or that I need to get to, and kind of know exactly where I am in that. So these are all things that are coming to enhance that meeting and conferencing experience in Teams. With it, there's also a lot of Office app integrations, right? So there's things such as Microsoft Planner, Power BI, OneNote, SharePoint, Yammer, etc. All of these Microsoft products that are getting this nice wrapper of Teams around them, so I can extend my team space to include some of these functionalities. To Planner you could use to track projects. Power BI to pull in some business data that you want to have neatly in a nice portal within the team space. Or keeping weekly meeting notes in OneNote and different things like that. taking not only the desktop client with Microsoft Teams, but also the mobile app. So if you have an iOS phone or iPhone or an Android, or even if you've just got a PC with a browser, you can get access to the team. So it's not just locked into having to have this desktop application. Extending the Outlook calendar over to Microsoft Teams. So the same way you did for Skype for Business, where you could schedule Skype for Business meetings, within Outlook, you can now schedule Teams meetings, and that calendar information is then also populated over into Microsoft Teams. So as you make that transition, you don't have to look in two different places. You can just go, yep, I've got a meeting, I can click to join right from within the Teams calendar as well. Won't go through every single one of these bullet points, but at the core too, for repository, right? SharePoint is the foundation. SharePoint Online is the foundation for storing all of these files and organizing. I'm working on a project file, or I'm working on an Excel document, and by bringing those into Teams, it also is extending the capabilities of kind of co-authoring or co-editing documents. So for instance, as I was working on this presentation, I was working on some content where my colleague was also working on kind of formatting the presentation to make it look pretty. So we were collaborating together kind of real time within that team space, kind of working on those documents. So the same sort of concept applies to other applications like Word and Excel, etc. But then taking not only the core of the Microsoft fundamentals, but also adding third-party services and app integration into Teams. So bringing in things like Trello or GitHub or Evernote, Twitter feeds, Jira, SurveyMonkey. These are just a few that are readily available today to enhance into the team workspace. And more are getting developed around the whole Teams application. So it's definitely a powerful tool, and definitely extensible outside of just the Microsoft space as well. I mentioned real-time collaboration and co-editing, so I don't need to repeat that. Microsoft phone system with calling plans. So all that functionality that Microsoft used to call Cloud PBX and Skype for Business Online, having Microsoft as being your carrier, that functionality is being moved and transitioned over to Teams. Initially it'll be side by side, and then eventually when Skype for Business Online goes away, that will all transition 100% over to Teams, and you can have all that functionality. So it can be used as a phone system and a potential PBX replacement. Last couple bullets here, direct routing. So this is pretty exciting. I've heard from a lot of customers that have been waiting for this. And what this is it allows you to take a local a session border controller, drop that to an on-prem customer environment, and you can then leverage your existing PBX or your existing carrier connection, either through a PRI or SIP trunk that's coming in to the on-premises environment, and maybe you can get a better, or the customer can get a better calling plan or better rates than what Microsoft is charging in their $12 or $24 calling plans. So this allows a customer to keep that control, keep the media local. There's an additional benefit of, by having a local session border controller there, that also gives you the ability to support like analog, which isn't supported natively in Teams or in Skype for Business Online. So if you've got a customer that has overhead paging needs or door access buzzers or analog fax lines, these are all things that could still be supported, so you could power that up. But again, it's coming through that local carrier rather than having Microsoft as being your PSTN provider. But all the call control still remains up in Microsoft Teams. Another use case scenario might be if there's a country out there that Microsoft doesn't currently support or hasn't released it yet. This would allow you to drop in a session border controller out in that country, and then use Teams as the call control and keeping that media local there. So that gives you those options. Teams is included in all the E-plans. It's also included in some of the small business plans, and they also recently announced a free version. But obviously, the free version may be limited down to certain functionality that they're actually licensed for, meaning like they wouldn't get the calling plans unless they bought that, and they wouldn't get some of the conferencing workloads. And there's matrices that are out there that can help you with that as well, to see if the free version might be something that might be of use to your customers. So that's what we know Teams is. One obvious thing that Teams isn't is it is not an on-premise solution. So if customers are like cloud averse and they say, hey, there's no way I'm not going to Office 365, I need to have a local solution, then Teams is not the buzzword that you should be using, right? So certainly you can do the direct routing that we talked about with Teams, but Microsoft does not offer an on-premise version of Teams. Oops, sorry, it skipped ahead a slide on me. This slide is from Gartner, and the reason that I like this slide so much is it does kind of show the various different components of Teams, and it also shows that I think there's this misconception that, hey, because Microsoft announces Skype for Business is going away and it's going to Teams, that means that Teams is really just a fancier term for Skype for Business. When in fact, at the core, Teams is more of that collaboration aspect of it, and kind of maybe the vision Microsoft had originally for kind of Skype for Business. But we've got the workstream collaboration, the content collaboration, and application integration that I mentioned in the previous slide that is the core foundation. And then unified communications, you can kind of see the line of delineation there. We can bolt that on. If you want to use it as a phone system, or if you want to use it as your conferencing solution, you can add it on. So it's built into the product, and that's what they're enhancing it to be, but it doesn't mean that, hey, if I want to start dabbling with Teams, that I have to move all my Skype for Business users, because that's not the case. And we'll get into a little more detail on some future upcoming slides. So what do we know? Before you're kind of talking to clients, there's some things and kind of talking points, shall you, that we want to talk about here. So one of the things is, hey, Teams is still kind of a work in progress when it comes to getting on feature parity with Skype for Business Online. Microsoft's been very, very aggressive on their roadmap, right? So they've been trying to get everything 100% feature parity, meaning all of the same functionality that you have in Skype for Business Online that you can do today from a voice PBX platform and conferencing and IM and presence, getting all of those same features available in Teams so that when you go to make that transition over to Teams, you're not losing anything. Or if you're moving over, perhaps you're even getting some enhancements with some of the developments on Teams. So you have to continually look at that roadmap that's out there and kind of understand what the requirements are and what you need right now, and kind of what the vision is from Microsoft on their roadmap to kind of know, okay, in Q3, these couple features will be there, and we should now start planning to deploy or pilot during those, during that, sometime in Q3 or Q4, right? So just know that it's still kind of a work in progress. And one of the big features on that we're kind of missing at this point is the native registration to Teams of a phone endpoint, right? So everything that's in Skype for Business Online today is supposed to be supported in Teams. So we're waiting on that last piece to kind of fall in there. And I think there'll be a lot of customers that are going to be jumping into Teams more aggressively at that point. I also mentioned earlier that Microsoft is transitioning from Skype for Business Online and not on-premise, online. So when I say SFBO in the abbreviation here, I'm meaning Skype for Business Online. Once they kind of get that 100% feature parity with Skype for Business Online, Microsoft will probably make some sort of announcement saying Skype for Business Online will go away as of such and such date. What we're hearing or kind of speculating is 2020 sometime is kind of be what that sunset date would be for Skype for Business Online. But a formal announcement, and it could even happen at Microsoft Ignite coming up in a few weeks. Something else to convey to your customers, right? Skype for Business investments that are made today are not lost with the Teams model. If you're in on-premise deployment today and you want to stay on-premise, the next version of Skype for Business is called Skype for Business 2019. It was just released in preview a few weeks ago, and it's expected to be released by the end of this calendar year in 2018. And with any new product like that, Microsoft would have the mainstream support, for at least the next 3 to 4 years, and then extended support, for a couple of years beyond that as well. So if a customer definitely wants to stay with Skype for Business on-prem or have specific regulations or things like that that force them to kind of keep it on-prem, they can. But this is also means in the investments, if they've invested a lot of phone endpoints, as long as they're certified for Skype for Business Online, a newer firmware should come out and support those phone devices to connect into Teams. So it's not a complete loss if you wanted to look to go towards Teams. And kind of lastly, looking forward, obviously, this is the vision for Microsoft for true UCC, and by UCC, we're talking about unified communications and collaborations. And so, they continue to develop around that and enhance it and improve it, so forth. But the customer still has options out there if they wanted to keep some of the unified communications components separate or keep with their legacy PBX. This next slide is really just kind of showing the timeline and milestones of kind of where we are with the product life cycles, right? So the first upper two left quadrants there, we have either a customer has Skype for Business deployed in their physical data center on-prem, and then the second one is, they may have it co-located in a managed service provider's data center, or in Tetra VX's perspective, we deploy some of the same on-prem infrastructure just in our data centers to support our hosted platforms, right? So both of those streams are in that same model, right? So that in this, it means, the 2015, which is the current active product or released product, the development, if I can grab the highlighter here, laser pointer, right around in this time frame, the 2016 to 2017 time frame, most of the development started to shift into the 2019 product or in Microsoft Teams. So, new features, enhancements are probably not going to be added to Skype for Business 2015. It's just going to be cumulative updates and fixes and hot fixes and security fixes that will be applied to that. And the development effort will go around 2019. And again, this then brings the standard support out to 2023, and then extended support out to 2025. So customers have a long way to go before they have to worry about making any other changes if they wanted to stay on-prem. The last quadrant over here, Skype for Business Online customer, if they're already there today, they can start their transition today over to Microsoft Teams, with knowing that a target date is sometime in 2020, where they would need to start getting everybody cut over to Microsoft Teams or find an alternative solution. Okay, so sorry, slides getting away from me. The what's new in Skype for Business 2019 for an on-premise standpoint? There's really four main things that Microsoft has called out in their documentation that's been publicly released, right? One is cloud voicemail. So it was called Azure Voicemail. With Skype for Business Online, it's now cloud voicemail. And with Exchange 2019, they're removing the unified messaging role. So that means that the voicemail and unified messaging that you had today goes up into the cloud. So there's going to be some hybrid configurations there between Skype for Business and Office 365 in order to serve that function. Second, a cloud auto attendant. So this is allowing, and we're looking up here, is going to allow customers to leverage a hybrid environment and take advantage of some of the newer enhancements that they're adding into Microsoft Teams, but at the same time, maybe your users are still Skype for Business on-premise. So it's allowing you to leverage those features in the cloud while still maintaining mostly a presence of on-premise. Item 3 down here in the lower left, Cloud Call Data Connector. So this is allowing you to take your on-prem data and uploading it up into Office 365 and into Teams, and leverage their call analytics platform to where you can get some really good detailed reporting and analytics around your calls in your environment. So if you had, again, if you're an on-prem customer and all this data is getting collected, it's allowing you to send that data to Office 365 to get processed in this nice interface and reporting engine. And then lastly, and maybe this is most important from Microsoft's standpoint, is the Teams integration. So today, if you had a customer that was Skype for Business 2015 and wanted to go to Teams, kind of the roadmap to that, if they want to do it cleanly, and by cleanly I mean migrating contacts and meeting information, what they're going to want to do is set up hybrid, migrate their users to Skype for Business Online. At that time, you can then decide to retire the on-prem Skype for Business environment, and then you can start making your transition for functionality over to Microsoft Teams. What 2019 brings with it is more of that kind of hybrid configuration directly to Teams from an on-prem environment, which will allow an easier transition to Teams and not have to make that double hop. All right, so some customer use cases. So these are just a couple. The first is that scenario where I am a Skype for Business or a Link user or customer on-premise today, and I want to get to Microsoft Teams. First thing we said, we've got to configure the hybrid configuration, and then once we get the hybrid configured, we can move the users into Skype for Business Online, and at that point, then we can do that transition over to Teams. Again, in that migration scenario, the nice part about that from a user's perspective is if I'm already using Skype for Business today and I have all my contacts and I have all of my meetings, this transition to Skype for Business Online, from an end user perspective, it's mostly seamless. They don't really even know that, hey, I'm now in Office versus an on-prem deployment. All my contacts moved, all my meetings moved, I'm good to go. So there's not really we're disrupting anything until we kind of go to make that transition over to Teams and educate around Teams. A second use case scenario, and it's pretty simplistic, as it's like half of what I just talked about in the first bullet point, but if I'm a Skype for Business Online only, I can still use all the workloads that Skype for Business has, and I can use Teams off to the side for the collaboration components, and then I can say at some point, hey, I want to move the IM and Presence over to Teams, and I still want to use conferencing for Skype for Business, or maybe I want to just move conferencing over to Teams and just leave Skype for Business for IM and Presence and calling. So you've got some flexibility there to transition those services over to Microsoft Teams on the back end. And at one point then you can just say, hey, as of this date, we're cutting everybody over to Teams, and all of that functionality is now into Teams. So you've got a nice seamless transition at that point. It's more just educating the users on the new interface and how to do things just slightly different in Teams versus Skype for Business. Last use case here that I put here would be, hey, you've got a customer out there, they don't have Skype for Business or Link today, but they really want to leverage Teams, or they're coming from a legacy PBX and they want to migrate over to Teams eventually. Then, looking at this direct routing to Teams may be a good solution, or just enabling them in Teams and leveraging the calling plans from Microsoft. So those are kind of the common use case scenarios that you might have with your customers out there. So the migration strategy. So this may seem a little repetitive, but it's kind of the way Microsoft has laid it out in their documentation as well. But there's this, coexistence, right? What's going to happen when we have users that are Skype for Business Online and Microsoft Teams at the same time? And let's just say we move 100 people over to Teams for a certain functionality, but the others are not. What kind of happens in that interoperability period, right? So we need to know kind of the incoming routing. What happens for an incoming phone call? Should it be ringing the Teams client, or should it be ringing the Skype for Business client? The meeting scheduling, right? Should we be educating users to schedule in Skype for Business meetings because we're still having the workload over there, or do we communicate out and have them using the Teams meetings going forward? And the bottom line is the overall client experience and which functionality is available to which client kind of when you're in that interop mode. So in that interop mode is kind of what we're talking about next, which I'll kind of briefly kind of touch on, but again, this session is not intended to go super deep. It's just kind of give you a high level understanding, and we've got some resources coming up that will give you more of that detail if you want to dig in a little bit deeper, or you could contact a partner like Tetra VX to kind of help you with your customer environments and making this transition. But essentially there's islands mode, where we're basically using Teams and Skype for Business side by side. Incoming calls kind of stay within their own product, so to speak. So if I make a call in Teams, it's just a Teams to Teams call. It isn't ringing a person's Skype for Business phone line or anything else like that. Or same thing for instant messaging. So it's just completely isolated, like they're two separate products. There's Skype for Business only, where incoming calls and chats will stay in Skype for Business, but everything else kind of goes over to Teams. And then there's a couple, and I won't go through every one of these, but you look at the SFB with Team, Collab, and Meetings, right? So in that situation, incoming calls and chats are routed to Skype for Business, meetings scheduled with Teams, and that's that use case scenario. And there's Teams only. Incoming calls, chats are routed to Teams, calls and chats are done from Teams. Skype for Business is only used to join legacy Skype meetings. And then there's legacy as well, that based on the interop policy that's set. And you get these controls in this phase migration. Microsoft has rolled out a combined Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business online portal now. So where before you didn't really have a lot of configuration items in Teams, It was more or less just licensing a user, and there may have been some underlying PowerShell things that you could do, but there wasn't a lot of interface there to kind of see the things on the teams. They're merging those in together because they're sharing a lot of the functions on the calling and IM and that sort of stuff on the back end. This is just giving you the control to set more policies, and more things will be enhanced and added into that combined portal, but they still have the legacy portal too for some of those things that aren't in that combined portal as well. So again, I guess to summarize this slide, right, the migration strategy, it doesn't just have to be a rip and replace or overnight, big bang, we're cutting everybody over. That certainly is an option, but you can make this a smoother transition depending on what your client's requirements are. Okay, as you're considering Teams as or any voice over IP for that matter, but specifically around Teams, rolling out a voice solution or using this as a PBX, what are your customers using today, right? Are they using Cisco, Avaya? Do they have a Skype for Business Enterprise voice deployment today? Is this, are there certain features and functionality that you need to be concerned with that are or are not available in Microsoft Teams? Or maybe it's a legacy way of doing something that you want to get captured that, okay, they don't have that direct one-to-one pairing in Teams, but maybe there's a better way to do that in Teams. And the main reason it was done in the legacy system was kind of a workaround, or wasn't really intended to be for that. And now it's, hey, well, if this is what your desired outcome is, you can do the same thing by doing this functionality, right? So just understanding how their current PBX is in use today and how that could or could not be integrated into Microsoft Teams. And obviously the integration, we're talking more on the dial planning, right? So if we did the direct routing method, and we have that session border controller that's in place out there, we could have essentially take that carrier connection, terminated at the session border controller, and let that session border controller do the routing decision. So let's say you were going from a Cisco call manager environment and you wanted to transition either a small percentage off, or maybe you were eventually going to migrate everybody over to Teams. That session border controller acts as that gateway cop to route those calls. So when that incoming call comes in or DID comes in from the carrier, hits the SBC, you can say, okay, these DID ranges, these route over to the Cisco call manager. These other subset of numbers, these we're going to route out through Teams and out through the direct route up to Microsoft Teams. So then you can migrate those users slowly over to Microsoft Teams. But when by dial planning, I'm talking about, okay, well, if I'm a Teams user and I dial a 4-digit extension, I need to make sure that if it's not within the Teams, the extension that I'm dialing, how do I get that routed over to the Cisco extension, right? So it's identifying those dial plan rules so that we can create the normalization rules so that on both sides, that same dialing pattern works on both platforms to kind of make it a common, smooth transition between the two. I mentioned, do they have a Yealink or Skype for Business deployment today? If they do, that kind of changes the way you look at the migration approach, right? So we go through that whole hybrid approach to get them to migrate it to Skype for Business Online first, and then look to transition features over to Microsoft Teams. I mentioned this before, but analog requirements, right? Legacy analog fax or door overhead paging, anything like that. Do they need to factor that into the new solution, or have they adapted, or can they maybe just use multicast paging across their phone endpoints, or find an IP-based solution that may work with Teams? What are their contact center requirements, right? So they might have a legacy Avaya contact center that does a whole lot of functionality that maybe isn't available yet in Teams. So capturing those requirements up front is going to be critical to make sure that they can do what they need to do in Teams. And if that means it doesn't have the features, then you have to look at, a third-party contact center that could, assist with that. That could be a hosted contact center, like a 5.9 type of solution. It could be a third-party vendor that has support for Teams directly that could give them some of the contact center solutions. So, or it could also be, we've got 10 call center agents and we're just going to leave them behind on the Avaya and we'll just keep the lights on for that, but everybody else we're moving up to Microsoft Teams, or we'll give everybody an extension in Teams, and then just the call center people would have kind of dual identities as they're doing their call center duties. So there's ways to approach that, but obviously understanding that and getting that information from the client is very, very important. I'll try to kind of hurry this up a little bit, but the video conferencing integration, right? What do they have for their conference rooms today? they have a legacy, Polycom system, a Cisco video endpoint? How will that fit in the new environment, right? Do we need to, is there direct video interop things that we can do at Office 365? Is there a third-party solution like Blue Jeans or Cisco meeting services, things of that matter, where they could bridge those into the Teams online? So definitely taking note of what they have for requirements there, or maybe those endpoints can just continue to maintain as they are in their legacy solutions, and they're just not tightly integrated in with Teams meetings. So we already talked about the SBC hardware, so I won't elaborate more on that. But other things, real quick, UC readiness. We're talking about voice over IP now. So some legacy phone systems may not have had to compete with data and voice services. So making sure that the network bandwidth and QoS policies, etc., are prioritizing the voice traffic if that's what's most important to that organization, to give end users the best experience, right? Do you have PoE switches to power up the physical phone endpoints, or do we need to add power supplies to our phone devices when we purchase them? So these are all things that we should make sure that are done, and sometimes are overlooked because people just start jumping in, doing a pilot. Hey, this is great, and before you know it, it takes off, and then 6 months later, people are complaining about the experience when some planning could have been done to avoid some of those headaches. This next one is very, very important, and we see this a lot because we do have an entire practice dedicated to change communications at Tetra VX, and what the intention of this is to get in front of the messaging to the end users. Like we said, they could just roll it out. People start using it haphazardly. Some people know about it. Some people don't know about it. Some people may not know how to use it, right? So it's the whole concept is to try to get ahead of understanding how people are using things today, understand their behaviors today and how they get things done, and trying to layer that in and educate the users as to how does that change in this new environment. And hey, this change is coming, and here's how you can enhance your meetings by doing X, Y, and Z. And here's how you make a phone call, and here's how you can extend mobility using the mobile apps. So these are all things that should get communicated out, because the last thing you want to have happen is you roll this out and you get people that, hey, I just don't get it, I don't like this new system, they reject it, they start bad mouthing it, and before you know, you've got a PR nightmare on your hand, and trying to say, why did we make this investment to go to Teams when we were doing just fine on our old platform? So the more you can do to get ready, or get your customers ready and communicate this out and get the training and the change comm out there, it's going to definitely help drive user adoption and satisfaction. And the last couple bullets here on this slide is to just talk about, as you're looking at this as a voice platform, you got to look at things like headset and phone endpoints to consider. So, headsets, they come in all different manufacturers and different varieties. They could be complete noise isolating over the ear and, over the hair bandana. And, some people like that. Some people hate that. Some people just like, a hang on the ear or minimal profile type of thing. So not one size fits all. So as you're talking to customers, it's kind of like trying to define those profiles of what they think their users would adapt to and what would reject. And especially if you're talking about, hey, we're going to try to replace all of our phone endpoints with just the soft client, definitely that comes into play. But phone endpoints are still very much in use today and needed. And there's lots of different manufacturers and different solutions that are out there. Which kind of leads me into Yealink, which is another provider that is sponsoring this event today. They have some solutions that are going to be released at the Ignite conference this year, which comes up in September. But you can kind of see on the little slider, right? We go from a mid-level, kind of what the role is or persona is, whether it could be a common area phone, or it could be an executive, or it could be a conference room. Just knowing that you've got different endpoints, that one phone, it may fit all needs, but most likely you're going to have a little bit of divisions. And hey, a common area phone, I don't need a fancy color screen on there. I just need basic phone services, and you can look at some lower end models, etc. But the nice part about the Yealinks and the other manufacturers as well is, if it was supported in Skype for Business Online, it should also be supported in Teams. So you're not throwing away any investments if you were to buy a phone endpoint today. That's certified for Skype for Business.
And Tim, this is Don, and I'm just going to jump in very quickly, very briefly. I appreciate it. Everything's going awesome so far. And when it comes to the hardware, you nailed a couple things here. including the headsets and everything. But with Yealink, one of our preferred partners on the Skype for Business line right now, that's a great way to go. And you mentioned something earlier about protecting your investments of hardware that's already existing. So certainly, if you are already invested in the T4 series, that's gonna carry you through here. And then when you want a pure Teams play and you've chosen to move on, the devices you want to move forward with at that point will be the ones that are certified for Microsoft Teams and the upcoming releases from Yealink. So a great way to go. And we can help you through that here at VoIP Supply, and obviously in conjunction with helping you plan your migration with our friends at Tetra. So we appreciate that and look forward to working with our reseller partners on that to help their clients through it.
Very good. Thank you for clarifying. Okay, so the challenge with Teams, I kind of broke it down into 4 different categories, right? One we kind of already talked about on the training and change comm, and hey, here there's this new interface. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with this, how I'm supposed to interact with my team. So, you know, that change comm has to kind of happen to kind of train the users, let them understand how this is going to improve their productivity, and it's going to be an improvement to their workflow rather than a distraction or something that's going to hamper their productivity, right? But the first one that I have on here, cultural, right? So today people are used to doing things in different silos, right? So most common would be, hey, we're working on a document together. I can use this presentation like I said before, right? Had we not been using Teams, we may have just been, okay, I'm going to make a few edits. I attach it to an email and I fire it off to my colleague who is then going to review it. And, you know, in the meantime, I might make a couple other edits, and then she goes and makes some other edits on hers and sends it back to me. Now I've got to kind of mar those up, and I'm, you know, doing things that way. Whereas if I did it in Teams, we've got one location for the document. I can see her edits, she can see my edits. We're collaborating real time, right? But just kind of getting that mindset of, hey, this is how I did it before, but this is how it can be much better. And there's also kind of this perception of, you know, you've got those use case scenarios where some people are very sensitive to giving up, I don't want to say control, but like if I put a document out there in the team space and, you know, people are critiquing it, etc., I kind of feel like I don't want to share that information, right? So these are just some cultural things that customers might have to think about as they navigate into the team space and that real-time collaboration experience. The collaboration fragmentation. The reason I have this on here is because the average large enterprise typically will use a couple different platforms for their conferencing and collaboration purposes. Maybe they're using Skype for Business for their phone system and, you know, some one-off Skype for Business meetings, but they still use GoToMeeting or WebEx on the side for more advanced meetings and so forth, right? How that will probably still continue to be the case if they have specific use case scenarios out there where they need to have a specialized feature or functionality provided. But Teams, you know, should be getting there to where, hey, not only the one-offs and the smaller team type of collaboration, but also the large meetings. And the Skype broadcast they had, they're also going to have a team broadcast as well. So perhaps they can merge those in, but adapting and understanding that even though it seems very straightforward that I can do all of these things with Teams, it may still end up with a little bit of fragmentation in their ultimate solution. And last, you know, governance, right? So for any of you out there that remember the older Exchange days and public folders, right? Sometimes people opened them up and people were creating them left and right. There was content that was dumped out there. You got thousands and thousands of public folders to deal with. The same sort of thing applies to Teams, right? Every day I get added to a different team and I get a notification that I'm added into a new team, and now I've got teams all over the place. You know, how do I manage that, or how do I keep that from getting, you know, I'll call it team bloat, right? So just making sure that, you know, as you look at or advise customers looking into this to take that into consideration. Hey, what sort of policies and processes and procedures should you be thinking about putting in place before you kind of roll this out to your organization? And this bullet, you know, for those looking at, you know, going to Teams, this is an interesting statistic that Gartner published that said by 2021, 10% of the current Skype for Business online user organizations will choose an alternative to Teams. I don't know a lot of the data behind that. It was just more of a, you know, even though everybody's kind of hopping that train to Teams, there still may be some customers that may not or may resist Teams or may looking at an alternative like WebEx Teams or Slack or some of those other solutions that are out in the marketplace. So something to consider. And last couple slides here, I already mentioned Tetra VX. We are a Microsoft Gold certified partner. We've won several awards. We've got lots of different certifications as well. And as I mentioned, we have hosted offerings as well, both by Cisco, Microsoft, and we've also got our own proprietary voice platform as well that we have, that we offer. And it's, along with Cisco and Microsoft, we also have field engineers that can help with on-prem deployments, or can also help make this transition up to Teams, even though they may not be a hosted UCaaS type of provider. So that's enough on the pitch there. On the question slides, but also on the right, I want to just call out, we've got a few resources, links that we put out here. The first one is the public Teams roadmap. Microsoft has been updating this on a regular basis to kind of show, here's all the calling features and kind of what state they're in, when they're expected to be released. I think it's updated quarterly. I think the last time I looked out there, it was a end of March type of update that they had out there. There's a couple links in the middle there that are talking more on adopting Teams and then planning your Teams rollout. And then lastly, there's an MVP that blogs out there that has posted something out to TechNet about the comparison between Teams and Skype for Business. So you can look at, here's Skype for Business on-prem, here's Skype for Business online, and here's Microsoft Teams, and here's Teams with direct routing, and all of the feature sets. So you can kind of see and say, oh, everything's green here, or there's something red here in Teams. That means that they're not developing it on it, or it's a roadmap item, down the road. So definitely some resources you guys can look at as you're communicating or preparing to have conversations with your customers out there. So with that, I will pause. I've been talking quite a bit, but for any questions that we may have.
I really appreciate it, Tim. Thanks for running through this with us. Your expertise is shining here, and I think as a VoIP supply expert, the thing is we focus so hard on the SIP world, and that when it comes to Skype for Business and Teams, your help is greatly appreciated, because I'm truly not an expert. The takeaway for me is that for the partners that joined us today, thank you for joining us. And we can certainly help you through, and when the key phrases come up and you run into a solution that requires Skype for Business, or you hear the word Teams, that's your indicator to pick up the phone and talk to myself, contact Tim about engaging and getting a solution for your client that suits where they're headed, and we can help them through it. We can help obviously on the equipment side, as well as being part of that program. We can help you with that recurring revenue, getting paid on these deals that you can work with Tetra on to bring to your clients. Their expertise, not just sitting here talking about how the transition looks, but with the field engineers and the on-site capabilities, things that should take any kind of hesitation you have to offer a solution like this to your client base. So we're super excited about the partnership. And with that said, if there's any other questions, I haven't seen anything really come across from the folks that were on. One minor one about some things that I think we kind of covered on the last slide about the feature readiness of Teams versus Skype for Business. And obviously, we put some resources here at the end of the slide. And we'll make these slides available to you, as well as the recording for the webinar, and the folks that couldn't make it too, so we can still help you out along the way. So thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, Tim, and all the folks over at Tetra for joining with us to bring the solutions to our customers. Really appreciate it. Look forward to a lot of growth.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon.
Have a great afternoon.